Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Pros Who Know. So I would like to introduce the group. I'll start with myself. My name is Joseph Lowry. I have been with ProShip since 2017. I am a strategic account manager. I actually represent Backcountry within the walls of ProShip. And I think Julian, you and I have had a relationship for the last 4 years?
Yeah, 3.5, basically.
Yeah. Tony, will you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Tony Verrill, Vice President of Sales here at ProShip. Work with a lot of new shippers as well as some current in Backcountry, and look forward to the conversation today with you, Julian, and Joe.
Julian?
And I'm Julian Cavaletto. I'm the transportation manager over at Backcountry. I've been with Backcountry for 4 years. I was a one-man transportation team for the first 3, and I got some help this year. So now we're a 2-man transportation team doing everything from inbound to outbound, domestic, international, all of our carrier partnerships, along with all of our support partnerships like ProShip. I've spent previous time in a previous life, I was a transportation or a warehouse manager, and I also did transportation brokerage domestically. And for the last 6 years, I've been managing e-com businesses here and at my previous stop.
Great. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. So for today's conversation, we're really looking through the lens of Backcountry and understand kind of what their challenges are and the goals that they are able to accomplish through that. We're also going to be looking at how they improved upon their carrier mix. And then we're also going to listen to how you were able to improve upon your customers' experience through all of that. We're going to take some time to understand kind of technology and where that comes from. And then we're going to have final words before the Q&A session. So I guess diving in, Julian, if you wouldn't mind, for those that don't know who Backcountry is or what Backcountry does, can you kind of give us just a background and all of that?
Yeah. So backcountry.com is an outdoor gear and apparel retail website. We were started by 2 outdoorsmen in Park City in 1996 selling avalanche beacons out of their garage. We've evolved a lot since then into summer sports and really just, trying to fulfill our motto, which is to provide the best outdoor gear and really just send people out adventuring. We're a company, full of gearheads. Everyone that works here lives the culture, whether it's fishing or biking or running. I use this example. We have what we call an adventure contest every year from Memorial Day to Labor Day. And basically, as an employee, you get to participate and you get points for outdoor activities. So if you go on a run, a bike ride, you go fishing, you go camping, ride your motorcycle through the desert, you can get points for all those things. And then when Labor Day hits, we tally up all the points and you get to see who had the most productive adventuring summer. The guy that won this year works here at the warehouse in Salt Lake City. His name is Martin. He recorded 410 hours on his bike. He did over 4,000 miles and he gained 320,000 feet of elevation. So that's what it takes to win. I placed 29th, which I think is respectable, but didn't quite put in the miles like Martin did. But that's the spirit of the company is, everyone that works here wants to be outdoors and has a passion for different things, and being able to leverage that and pass that to our customers and share that enthusiasm and get people outdoors is really what we're trying to do.
That's amazing. Appreciate that. Thank you. I guess with that perspective, can you walk us through some of the challenges that you dealt with before ProShip?
Yeah. So I came into the job December of 2020. Peak COVID, first real pandemic peak, right? UPS and FedEx have put caps on everyone. We emergency onboarded 2 carriers in October of that year just to make sure that we had enough capacity to even get packages out the door. So that was one thing when we were looking, we did our ProShip evaluation or the project evaluation and then ProShip implementation in 21 and 22. really it was, how do we better plan for capacity caps, heading into peak 2021? We were using ConnectShip previously, and they were, with the increased reliance on UPS, specifically we were a UPS house at the time, on surcharges. There were gaps in the ConnectShip rate shopping, just not being complete and not factoring in things like peak season surcharges. And then just the complexity of running data analysis when you're, there isn't a nice output from ConnectShip you have to look at. So you have to piece a bunch of different, pieces of data together to kind of get, a holistic picture of what you're looking at, so that you can make better decisions on, on where your shipping is and knowing where your costs are. So that was kind of pre problems and what we were looking to solve. As far as like what we looked at, we evaluated 3 or 4 different partners, including ProShip. It was probably a 6-month selection kind of evaluation process. Once we made a selection, we kind of rolled in, and then from an implementation standpoint, we did a 2-phase implementation. Phase 1 was roughly 3 or 4 months, and it was a replace ConnectShip, get a shipping type phase, right? So we can cut over, stop using one, and solely rely on ProShip. And then there was another kind of 2 or 3 month phase 2, which was really driving the enhancements that we were sold on and that we wanted to be able to push to the business. Things like, being able to restrict zip codes to faraway zip codes for certain ship modes, so customers continue to get their packages on time. Capacity limitations, so if we're capped at 2,000 packages, the rate shop would stop sending that carrier more packages. If they got to 2,000, just roll over to the next one. And things like peak season surcharge calculation, having that factored into the rate shopping, so we were making the best choice possible.
If you don't mind me chiming in, I know kind of in prep for this conversation, we kind of talked to obviously I think the audience wants to know kind of how long did it take, what were the wins and all that, but just kind of throwing it back, just in reflection of like now that we're live for the last couple of years and been successful, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about what it's enabled for the multi-carrier approach and kind of where you guys have seen wins there to fulfill your goals of being carrier agnostic. What was the main challenge, right? Like as you wrap your arms around all the, how do we become carrier agnostic? How do we get a true rate shopper? How do we, all the bells and whistles that are on the requirements list? What was, I guess that's my follow-up question is like, what was the biggest challenge as far as getting that consensus? I mean, obviously yourself and your colleague probably did a lot of the work, but was there a ton of inputs from operations, customer service, to feed your guys' kind of transportation strategy?
I mean, I think, as far as transportation strategy, I would say yes. Customer service, obviously finance with costs, and then, we want to make sure customers are happy, and that, that's a piece of it is, having a tool that allows us to be more flexible, right? And we can swap out of one carrier and into another carrier relatively easily versus it being a code change in our system or something like that. As far as a lot of the analysis, it was mostly my team. It has a fulfillment impact. So, in sitting here in one of our fulfillment centers, they were very, heavily involved, especially on the engineering side and the tech side, making sure that we'd be able to support, and what kind of model did we want to go with? I know there was multiple options, right? You can go on-prem, you can go, we did a remote server. Now we're looking at like, do we want to move it into the Google Cloud, right, away from the server, which wasn't a thing we were doing back then, but it's something we're doing now. So, getting buy-in from tech to make sure that they could support us and get us live was super important. That was probably the most important team, making sure that we're not impacting customers. Like, hey, if I change these things, if anything, all the abilities of an actual rate shopper and a true tool like ProShip will only enhance the customer experience, because we'll have more control on ship modes that we use. And, if carriers are underperforming, we can restrict area, service area. Like, if I'm just using random examples, but if like FedEx all of a sudden can't deliver to Idaho, I can transition all my Idaho volume through ProShip to a different carrier, right?
Yeah.
Or if there's a hurricane or something, right, you can hold those packages and wait until service is resumed and then ship them out versus shipping them out and then just kind of hoping they get there and don't get lost.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that just sparked for me, obviously getting the buy-in, and I think kind of relates back to at least our viewpoint as a vendor in this space is really kind of the shipping challenges never stop, right? You start with that initial kind of problem statement, and I think to your point, it's all the flexibilities around your core service to your customers that just need to fall into place. But that is always the interesting piece, that we kind of go through as a vendor in this space is like, I guess, granted, maybe it's the carriers that have always, imposed themselves on a constant change the last couple of years, but there always is more to be done, right? There never is you're done with the project, hey, we'll touch base whenever something else happens. It's like, you already know something else is going to happen, right? And I think that's what we've seen the most is typically after an initial go live, it could be 6 months, could be a year, could be 18 months, but there's typically that 5, 10, 20% kind of functionality that grows, almost naturally. And it's probably more so stuff you don't think about in your initial requirements list, but probably comes up as you're working through the problems and finding solutions is kind of that consistent improvement process, right? And I think that's where thinking through this slide as far as kind of what are the goals pre-project, it is, handling the curveballs is probably what becomes kind of the next goal or the next problem to solve right after a project, right? So 2024, 2025 will certainly bring its own challenges as we continue. So
yeah, I mean, a perfect example of that, right? When we launched ProShip, we built in a tool to be able to add in UPS peak season surcharge at a flexing rate, right? So it's like their laddered system. Once you hit this volume, it's $1. Then you go to the next year, it's $2. I actually use that tool now to push more volume we use FedEx now. We moved away from UPS, but I use it to push volume to FedEx instead of away. Because as volumes came down in 2022, it didn't become about, capacity caps or peak season surcharge, the laddering peak season surcharges as much as it became about how do I meet my contractual minimums? How do I make sure I stay within my spend bands, right? That type of stuff. And so having a tool, being able to use that tool that was originally designed to peel volume away from UPS and FedEx, using it to push volume to UPS and FedEx is a perfect example of what you're talking about in the ever-changing market of the last 4 years. It's been insane. The rules keep changing. The goalposts keep moving is what I keep telling my FedEx rep. And yes, having that flexibility within the system to customize things and help you stay as nimble as possible is critical.
So that same point, though, I think it's important just to kind of keep moving through is the idea, of your carrier mix and what you did to right size that. So, I mean, it'd be interesting to hear more about kind of what you did behind the scenes to do that.
Yeah, I think, we put data drive optimization at the top, and that's on purpose. I think if you're going to an optimization or, a cost optimization or a service optimization, you need to understand your transportation data, right? That is the most important part of any transportation analysis. And it sounds basic, but from talking to some folks, it's not always, the initial part is understanding how much are you spending on accessorials? How much are you spending on specific accessorials? Knowing, how much, do you use a lot of zone 8 shipping? Do you utilize a lot of high dim shipping? Do you have a lot of oversized packages? Different things like that. Just, understanding where your pain points are or where your benefits are, right? Do you have a bunch of packages that carriers really like? Like knowing that, hey, I'm in the sweet spot, I should be getting a sweet deal is just as important as what I have to deal with, which is crap. I ship kayaks and no one wants kayaks. So how do I even get this kayak to the customer's house, right? You have to understand both sides of it. And that goes right into carrier mix, right? It's understanding it's not just a carrier selling you, it's asking a lot of questions of them. Where's their sweet spot? What kind of volume do they want? Where do they want it? What, do they want shoe size packages? Do they want sub 1 pound pricing? Or do they want sub 1 pound packages? Understanding where they want and whether you have that kind of volume to give them when you're evaluating partners is super important. I think I evaluated probably 30, 40 carriers in 2022 because we were like, man, UPS is hosing us. We got to figure out some solutions. And there were, I don't know, 40 million brand new carriers in 2022 that were like, yeah, we could do this. Sure. There's plenty of demand. Let's knock it out. So, it's doing a quick being able to do an evaluation of those and like, hey, where are your strengths and weaknesses? Is it a good fit for my business and my end customer? Is it a high level of service and certainty? Okay, maybe we move forward. Hey, this isn't a good fit, right? And being able to tell that very quickly.
I have a question and I'll start with a statement. And I feel like you mentioned it as far as kind of understanding your data, understanding what you can give the carrier. My question, and I'll make a statement before I throw it back to you, is like, have carriers, am I just like thinking this, or have carriers been more open as far as what they want and they don't want? Maybe it's just more public now of the quarterly stock calls as far as their cost per package, their revenue per package affecting the bottom line and share prices, right? Maybe it's just more so that sign of the times with the carriers trying to get volume back and profitable volume. But on your side, being from a shipper, obviously, we'll get to it next as far as kind of how do you organize your data. And I think it's a pitch for ProShip's partner ecosystem or other people out there that ProShip isn't always the tool that you're getting your data organized in and making sense of it. But with that, I guess my question is, have carriers evolved as far as their transparency? Do you still have to kind of pry that out of them? Or just because you have the data now, are you just better equipped? Like that would be kind of 3-part question.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I do think carriers are more transparent. Like it, I guess as a history, I fired UPS in the summer of 2023 and we moved to FedEx as our primary carrier, right? We did a complete network overhaul. I fired 3 carriers on the same day. And I went from a 6-carrier model to a 3-carrier model, right? As a part of, we had declining volumes, sales didn't look like they were going to trend positively for a while. We needed to kind of consolidate our base, figure out, hey, which partners are the best partners, who do we want to keep, and who do we really just not need when we have kind of a smaller pie to give around, right? And so it's, carriers are open about it. Like one of my partners is DHL Ecom, and I go talk to DHL Ecom, and they're like, I don't want anything over 5 pounds, right? And they know their sweet spot is sub 1 pound, 1 to 5 pounds. They won't even, when I talk pricing with them, we don't ever talk. I don't even know that I have pricing above 5 pounds because it's like, they don't want it and it doesn't make sense. Right.
Yeah.
If it's a regional carrier, like On Track, like that's West Coast, right? So, hey, do you have a high concentration of sales or of outbound packages to the West Coast? And do you have a DC or a fulfillment center somewhere on the West Coast where they can pick up from, right? And direct eject into their network. And they're open and honest, and now I think there's some flexibility there. We've been able to negotiate because of some of the bulky packages we have. We've been able to negotiate some things like, I'm like, hey, if you want the socks, I need you to take snowboards too, right? Like, so you work on dim divisor and different things like that. But again, to go into negotiation strategies, it's very important to know what do I need and what is important to me, what costs me money, where are my pain points, and how do I kind of bundle some of the good stuff that I have with some of the bad stuff. That way, it's a good deal for the carrier, and it's also a good deal for me because they're helping me out. I think it really is. It's a partnership landscape, but you have to be able to give them good information to be able to leverage it to the best of your ability.
Yeah, I think we'll talk through some of the technology, and maybe that's a good transition for in the next slide as we talk through technology. But kind of going back to my statement, I mean, gathering your data is one thing. I think you kind of mentioned it. With a smaller team, right? How do other tools help you gather that data? just say from a ProShip perspective, I think that's the pitch for us with our kind of our audit analytics, BI partners out there, that like from a ProShip perspective, we're not trying to be everything to everybody, and kind of like the shippers will naturally almost sometimes find what is the best fit for them as far as full service, just visibility, just consulting on the data. I don't know if you want to talk on that. I know we have a section around leveraging technology, but I think these things go hand in hand as far as getting your data assimilated all together so it makes sense is the first step, and then just the continuous visibility into it. I don't know. That's the pitch from my side, is like it does, I don't think there's one vendor that can do it all, right? And I think it's kind of combining these things to help you as a customer, as a shipper succeed, is kind of part of that, finding the right mix, right? So
yeah, I think, like I said, I was a one-man team for 3 years, the first 3 years. And, when you're having to run analytics for, $50 million worth of spend to figure out what's costing me a lot of money, what's not, having partners that homogenize that data, right? So from a ProShip standpoint, I can look, and whether it's shipped DHL or FedEx or USPS or OnTrack or whatever partner you use, the data and the shipment history within ProShip Office is homogenized, right? So I can go look at it. I can see, okay, what happened in this rate shop? Why did this get selected? And then once it got selected, you can see what are all the surcharges that this package is getting shipped, right? So you can, you can dial into the nitty gritty like I do sometimes, or you can run high level kind of broader analysis. And then, having a partner on the back end that does the same thing with your invoice data is equally as important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get to a lot of that on the technology enablement slide here in probably 10 minutes here. Joe, is there anything else closing this piece out?
No, I think really it's just understanding how Backcountry leverage their relationships, because I think at the end of it, right, it's how does that translate into the cart? What's the customer experience?
Yeah,
that comes from that, right? So I think we covered it all. I think we touched on it all, but I think this is really like the next piece to that conversation.
Yeah. So I mean, the customer is everything. If no one buys anything from us, I'm out of a job. We're out of a business. We're all done, right? So making sure that those customers are happy and that they're getting a good experience is the most important thing. I always tell people, I was a Backcountry customer before I was a Backcountry employee, and we sell people their passion, right? We're not selling toilet paper or even food, or even like we sell t-shirts, but we sell other stuff too. The important stuff is like the skis, the snowboards, the fly rods. It's the stuff that people are passionate about, that they're excited about to do outside of work. And when you're responsible for delivering that person their new pair of skis that is maybe the most expensive online purchase, or maybe the most expensive purchase they make all year, right? There's an additional level of pressure. There's an additional level of enjoyment in doing that, but there's an additional level of pressure to make it a good experience and make sure that they have that visibility from click purchase to, hey, we shipped it, here's when it's supposed to get there. And then, the next step of that, which is more future thinking for me, is like, if there's an exception, how do you even get ahead of that and communicate to the customer, hey, there's a weather delay. Hey, there's a mechanical delay. And unfortunately, it's going to be a day later than what we originally thought. That's kind of, the next step in our evolution. We're not there yet from a tech standpoint, but right now it's, hey, you're going to get it in this amount of days. And we kind of say, hey, we shipped it, here's your tracking number. And then we do, I do a lot of carrier KPIs. We monitor performance as far as, hey, we expected, this to deliver in, 4 days. Did it deliver in 4 days? And doing that at a macro level. And again, that's different partners, right? You need a combination of a front end partner where you're shipping, like ProShip, and then, a back end partner. We use Corber, but a back end partner that's doing your audit and different things, that's giving you a BI to be able to look at that stuff and like, are we delivering to our customer on what we're saying we're shipping, right?
Yeah. I think that's been the biggest thing that obviously as a consumer, we saw it all with with your uncle or your grandma at Thanksgiving was talking about supply chain. And it's like, hey, you finally care about my career for once. Shipping was not always thought about, right? And I think that's the biggest, talking about like customer experience, that's the biggest evolution, right? As actual consumer, you do understand now, hey, it's got to go through Memphis and then up to Chicago to get to Milwaukee, for something, I'm expecting in a couple days that went via air. And I think it's almost shifted, right? 2015 to 2019, 2020, it was all, 2-day delivery, 1-day delivery, keep up with Amazon. There's certainly some of that still, but I think the expectation of those customers, as long as I know where it is, as long as you can tell me where it is and you maybe proactively, reach out to me, and there's that like relationship beyond just, it'll get there when it gets there, of the brand. I think that's been the biggest, I guess, change that I've seen is, and I forget the carrier, there's the industry surveys you see. I think there was some like survey results this last year around like the expectation for most, direct consumer now is like 3 days rather than 2, like when polling customers. And I think it goes back to just that visibility, right? That's the utopia of like knowing where your shipment is at any given point. But then now the customers are almost like, I don't even want to look that up anymore. Why don't you just tell me over that 2 days or 6 days if it's shipped over a weekend and it's not, a ground service not moving on a Sunday. I think people, they're a little bit more after COVID, in the pandemic, adapt to that. So just more technology into the equation and touch points with the customer, but it's relatively simple to execute, right? I mean, it's back to just, visibility, transparency, right? So.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, everything I've talked about with our marketing folks and talked about, different logistics people with different companies, the two things that consumers are still very sensitive about are they don't want to pay for shipping still, right? Which you can mitigate in a numerous number of ways, right? And then the second one is what you said. They want to know when it's going to get there. They don't necessarily care if it's going to be 3 days, but they want to know, hey, it's going to get here in 3 days. And if there's a change or a delay, they want to be told, hey, there's a change or, there's a change in your delivery date. And that's kind of, the next step for us. Some people are already there. We're not quite there yet. We're working on it. That's probably a 2025, initiative. Like when I look at our in-cart experience right now, we say, hey, our standard shipping is 3 to 5 days. You'll get it in 3 to 5 days. Mm-hmm. Well, what it doesn't tell is 40% of people get their order in 2 days, right? Yep. So I'm over delivering a lot of the times on my own SLA, but I don't get to take credit for it because I don't know which 40% of people which 40% are getting in 2 days in the cart, right? So that's the next evolution for us is, we need some software and some different things. We're working on it, but it's being able to pull that inventory, knowing where your inventory is in the cart, knowing where the customer is, and being able to give them, hey, you can actually you're in Salt Lake City. Our warehouse is in Salt Lake City. You can pick standard shipping and you'll get yours tomorrow, and being able to kind of live tell a customer that that's kind of in my mind, the final evolution of where you get to, from a customer experience standpoint in the cart.
And I think you're obviously thinking about it correctly as far as in the cart where those customer touch bases are. But at least from our side, we've heard the carriers start to think that way as well too. So like for the first time ever, a large national carrier, you saw it all this summer with the AI craze, but at least they're trying to have more real-time visibility. It isn't just like we'll update you when it scans overnight at like 2:30 a.m. when it hits Memphis, right? Like or Louisville, wherever it needs to go to, right? And so you do see some carriers trying to get to that more real-time. You got, some of the technology coming into play as far as, predicting some of those delays, but also then more technology for us as a third-party vendor or just the shipper themselves if you want to bypass a third-party vendor to have some of these capabilities yourself, right? So it has been a different change, and it's awesome to hear what Backcountry's thinking about as far as increasing that experience, but I think the whole industry is moving there, slowly, right? Like you talked about some of these carriers starting to care. Well, if they say we're going to do it, might not take them 6 months to get there. It might take them a little bit longer, right? But at least
Yeah.
there's the thought coming from the carrier side, trying to meet those shippers, and not certainly from a third party perspective, trying to meet those capabilities somewhere in the middle, right? It can't just be the shippers always pulling the weight in the industry, right? So.
Yeah, they're definitely getting better. I mean, the picture POD that a lot of regional carriers had that UPS and FedEx have now adopted is a good example of that, right?
Yeah.
Specifically to help combat fraud and different things, right? If you have a picture of it being delivered, it's a lot more than, hey, FedEx said they delivered it, so they probably delivered it, 98% chance or whatever. And being able to kind of spot fraud in that way is beneficial. Some other things is like, from a cost control standpoint, right? Where like one example of how we leverage ProShip is we use DHL Expedited, which is a 2 to 6 day service. I have a 3 to 5 day SLA. So I use ProShip to chop the 6 day zones off so that I'm making sure that a customer doesn't have a transit longer than 5 days. I also update that. I get a kind of regular, I do it like once every other month, but I get every other month I have DHL send me, hey, what are your current transit times from my zip code to all zip codes? Their internal expected transit time. And then I upload that spreadsheet into ProShip, and those are the new transit times for expedited service, right? That you're pinging live and rate shopping. So you're making sure that we're not picking anything that is too slow. And if I say, hey, their network, say, for example, DHL goes down to 85% on time. I'm like, man, they're struggling. I can chop that down to 3 days and be like, hey, we're really going to limit their footprint and limit their impact, because we don't want we don't want customers to have a bad experience. We'll pay more to ship it with FedEx. We did that with OnTrack in 2021, where they were really struggling into Washington and Oregon. And I just turned those states off. I was like, okay, that's fine. Don't worry about it. We'll ship those with UPS, right? But you need a software that allows you to make, again, going back to our earlier point, flexibility, right? You never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to throw your way. And you need to have a partner that's able to allow you to be nimble and make changes, on within days of realizing the problem, if not hours.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That might be a good transition to our last piece of this, unless Joey, unless you had anything to wrap up the enhanced.
No, I actually was going to tee you up because you keep hinting at technology and all the pieces there around it. So I'm going to give you the floor and let you shine.
Yeah. We definitely have hit on a number of different times, right? I think from a ProShip perspective, talking about the tech stack, it's different for every shipper, but in every case, there's an ERP, a WMS. There is what Julian's talking about as far as rate shopping, or your preferred carrier, your secondary carriers that fit their specific roles. But the tech stack for us is always, where are we getting the data from? Where are we getting it back to? And I think that's where, kind of to plug our partners around analytics, audit, BI capabilities. That's where I think from our perspective, this is our client's data. Where can they leverage it? Kind of attitude from the start of an engagement, to all of our current customers, is where we've seen the most process improvements or improvements in general, is the use of that data, right? So typically it's, call it a feedback loop or what it might be, but as Julian mentioned, like unless you're able to kind of see that data in real time or relatively real time, if you only are every 2 weeks with a carrier invoice cycle, you can miss out on some savings, or you're not able to adequately talk with the customer in transit. That can handcuff you when you start to run into continuous improvement and being better for the next order, right? So from a tech stack perspective, I think what we see is exactly that rate shopping, that ground versus air, that time in transit component. We do see additional commitment date, carrier volume balancing, adding, removing, changing carrier time in transit thresholds. all is kind of they can be one-off tools. They can be used in tandem. It's going to be different how the customer wants to kind of put all the pieces of the puzzle together. I think just backtracking to where we started in this conversation, as far as, where you guys were at, Julian, I'm really kind of curious, just the leveraging technology, as a holistic perspective. You mentioned, toggling carriers in and out, wholesale changes with carriers. Was there any other like benefits from that flexibility perspective that like it allowed you to do? Like, I'm thinking maybe negotiation leverage, or just some added weight in those conversations with carriers. Just, once you have that technology kind of foundation, is there anything that comes to mind that, besides just switching carriers or rate shopping?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the foundation we have with ProShip and Corber and front end and back end data, that's how I got my FedEx contract last year. Like, and that's why, we were able to push them as hard as we wanted to, is because we understood where our costs were. We were able to take a deep dive, having large chunks of data. I could go in and say, okay, if I get 2% more discount on my residential surcharge, right, that's $100,000 a year, right? Or $200,000 a year. Versus, the one thing I always tell people, and I'll say it here, don't ever trust UPS and FedEx math. Go do it yourself. They're not the best mathematicians from my experience. So you need to be able to double check the analytics and, leveraging the data, being able to show them, hey, you're saying this is worth $6 million. I'm showing it's only worth $2 million. And here's why, right? And that's the important part, is the here's why. Because when you start showing them that you understand what's going on and where the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, they start paying a little bit more attention, and you get it's a different experience, right? You kind of have to prove to them that you understand how all their 50 pages of fine print works, but and utilize your tools to show that. And then you can reverse the tables on them, right? You can ask for discounts that hey, this is $500,000, and sometimes they miss it. They don't catch. They're like, oh yeah, we'll give you that one, no problem. Like,
they can take advantage of their own complexity that they created, right? I mean, that is the one thing that's gainful employment for all of us in this space, is the complexity of carrier pricing that is just going to continue, right? The path we're on is just even more complex, right? There are some carriers that are kind of fighting for the simplicity model, which is good. Simpler pricing now to combat that, but even though they might get pulled into that eventually, right? I think the one thing you mentioned is kind of making sense of it. That's probably the last thing of technology, is how, technical improvements. What we have seen is really kind of having that internalized knowledge of, if I make a change here, how is it going to affect there? Or like, what are these tweaks that I make today? How is that going to propagate over, immediate on the warehouse floor or stores or 3PLs, or what is the impact over the year, over my budget cycle, so on and so forth. And I think that's that kind of give and take, where it starts all the way at the requirements. What am I going to get out of it? It's the continuous improvement process, or the new challenges and goals that come up throughout it all. And then just kind of having that kind of dynamic nature of the relationship, right? So,
yeah, 100%. I mean, demand surcharges didn't exist 3 years ago, right? They exist now, and they're going to continue to exist. And it's, again, we talked about, understanding negotiation and things like that. But the second piece of that is like, hey, when they make a change or they move these goalposts, or like, for the UPS example, if they add a minimum billable weight to additional handling, being able to calculate very quickly, hey, how much is that worth? Like, should I go, because it's hard to chase everything. Is that $50,000 extra a year, right? And I'll live with that one, and I'll chase the next one that's $500,000 a year, right? And understanding where to pick your battles with those guys, and how firmly you want to pick them, right? Because sometimes it sounds bad, but it's not that bad, and sometimes it doesn't sound bad, but it's a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. When it's more of all right, let's go on to the next slide real quick, and then let's stop. Let's pause.
Yeah.
What are you saying? Yeah,
or if it's not even on the slide.
I heard, I guess that's the last piece. We could kind of wrap up the conversation, go to Q&A here, I'm sure in a few moments. But that was what just comes to mind, what we heard from kind of an industry consultant, one of our partner networks, was kind of giving that data, having that data normalized, if you would, in negotiation, in turn kind of helps you get pricing negotiation or pricing back, but also more competitive pricing. So I think it was a statement around, if you can't like tell the carrier and have it be across the board, what is the best pricing for me, my package profile, all that, it's just going to inherently be more work for you as a shipper, right? If they don't know how to accurately price, that's where you get into RFP revision 3, 4, 5. I don't know how many you would go to say, all right, I'm done. But kind of giving them all that up front should cut down the time, give you the best pricing, out of the gate. And kind of back to that, they'll be able to tell you, whether they have it or whether they can fulfill or not, right?
So. Yeah. You don't want to give them the answers to the test. You definitely. I always lean towards, give me your best. Here's my volume. Give me your best foot forward, and then I'll give them some direction on where I need them to go. I don't like giving stuff up front, too much information up front, because you never know when they're going to come in way lower than even or way better on certain things than even what your expectations are, right? You can always level set after the fact, and keep the wins that you got in the initial proposal. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's
so
cool.
I was going to say, I think those are both really good pieces, but I think the audience would like, I know I would like to hear, if you could summarize this into one piece of advice, right? What's the one takeaway that someone should be able to take from this? What is it? And Julian, I'm going to make you go first.
Okay. The biggest takeaway from a one-man transportation team is get some partners that will help you normalize your transportation data so that you understand where your costs are, what is costing you a lot of money, what is not costing you a lot of money, which will enable you to negotiate a better position and put your company in a position to win.
Savvy. Yeah, I like it.
Well, yeah.
Tony, what about you?
Yeah, from a provider perspective, I think it's important to just hear your partners out. I think just kind of from my position being on the sales side, a lot of it too is like you get very focused and narrow because you got project deadlines and only so much IT bandwidth and only so much personal bandwidth and a team of one, right? There is only so much you can take in a project, but I think taking that extra 15, 30 minutes or maybe that extra meeting and a review process, or with the current vendor having some type of cadence, like communicating all of the capabilities, I think gives a credence to this conversation, because as you have more challenges come up, you might not need all of the capabilities out of the gate, right? But at least knowing they're there, so as you need to pivot, it can be a resource for you. I think that's the common mistake that I find even myself and my team falling into is like, well, we're only looking to do this, but it's like there's always so much more than just what's on the immediate task list, right? And so whether you use the functionality or not of your different platforms, of different consultancies, of shipping software like ProShip, getting the full depth of what that system can do over the next decade for you, I think is the final advice that I kind of see taking out of this is like, you might not need to use it. You might use those 6 carriers to only go down to 3, but those 6 carriers helped you save how much money during that period. You can always go back, right? And so it's the ebb and flow to know all of your capabilities is probably my final advice, which easier said than done sometimes when you only got 3 months for the project and you can't do it all at once, right? So,
like you said earlier, the job security in the coming years is looking good. So,
yeah, thank you to Team Brown and Purple.
Yeah.
All right, well, it was great. Thank you, gentlemen. I think we've got some time. We've got a few questions that came in, so I'm going to kind of hit through these. First and foremost, I guess, Julian, what was the real return on investment with ProShip? How much did you actually save when you onboarded ProShip? Obviously, we don't need finite numbers, but ballpark it. What was the benefit?
Millions. Granted, like even within year one, right? And the example I'll give you is because of ProShip, we were able to move to using DHL Expedited, which is a 2 to 6 day service. I was able to chop their 6-day zip codes off, move them into my 3 to 5 day SLA, and that alone saved me $4 million in year one. Having all of UPS's accessorials in our rate shop, which is not how it worked in ConnectShip. You had basically base rate, fuel, and residential surcharge, it may have changed, but when I was using it, those are the only three. So you have no oversized, no additional handling, no peak season surcharge, no demand surcharge, especially if you're using even more than 3 carriers, which is what I use, right? But kind of factoring all of that in, and that's critical, and that'll save you money, very quickly. You'll just start making better carrier decisions. But then just being able to leverage those tools, like the one with the zip codes that I mentioned with DHL, that saved us, I think it was like $3.5 million in year one.
I think if I remember correctly, that's awesome figure, by the way, on like the actual like freight spend side. That's like what a lot of people, maybe someone that's asking this question from the audience here, sees immediately is the dollar savings of rate shopping multi-carriers. I think one of the aspects that I remember, critically, and it was a good process you went through this, was a lot of the deep technical vetting. Like your IT team was thorough, is what I would, and I think that built confidence from, at least from my perspective, thinking back on it, but it also kind of built confidence of like, at least from a ProShip perspective, with the continuous updates and the upkeep of the actual carriers and the changes, which now, I mean, when we deployed, you wouldn't imagine 6 new surcharges in a single year coming down from a single carrier, let alone all the carriers, right? I think that's the biggest one that I would take away, just to chime in on the ROI, it was almost more so like the opportunity cost. Instead of having 2 people to manage a system in-house, what can those people do with their time not managing shipping software? And it's hard to put a price tag on that or what the ROI is. I'm sure you've realized it, 10 times over, but that's what I would add to that as far as my takeaway of kind of where some other areas of savings came from, regardless of freight spend, right? So
yeah, I mean, the cost of ProShip was, I don't know, probably 20x the cost of ConnectShip. It's worth every penny.
Yeah, we definitely weren't cheaper than your annual fees with your incumbent.
No. But I mean, they make it cheap because they want all your information too. Whether they use it or not, allegedly, is a topic for a different day.
Yeah, that's the next webinar.
So you mentioned you had 6, you went to 3, right? So your carrier network has refined, but obviously there's always carriers popping up in the market. People are always knocking on the door trying to get your freight. But what are some of the factors that Backcountry does to evaluate the current carrier mix, and what do you look to the future with them? And then also with those emerging carriers, what are you trying to look for that might disrupt the industry or the marketplace that's going to set you apart?
It's a good question. I've right now, with current carriers, obviously we do performance KPIs, and hey, where's your on time? How are you doing? We kind of break it. We try and look at it as granularly as we have time for, to be honest, between the two of us. Sometimes it's more granular than other times. As far as carrier evaluations, it comes down to, is it a good fit with our customer, and will it save me money? Like ultimately, if you're doing transportation, you're probably trying to save money in some capacity, or is it cost neutral and a really big improvement to customer service, right? That is also a potential fit. I have concerns looking forward. There's a lot of concern around sub 1 pound pricing through the post office, right? Is that going to go away next year? Maybe. There's been talks of it. 20% of my packages move sub 1 pound. So if that goes away, that's a massive price increase on a lot of packages. is the UPS FedEx model viable long term? Like, you're looking at all these surcharges and all these things they're doing to generate additional revenue on existing packages, right? They'll tell you their costs are going up, but it's revenue generation is what it is. And if these other carriers, these regional carriers, are able to, have a more flexible model with, I'll call it the Uber style, courier style model, right? Where they can increase drivers, decrease drivers like that on a daily basis based on active demand. Is that a better long-term model? And now that they've been around for 2-3 years, like, I'm actively looking next year into testing into one of those partnerships, and seeing if, it's a good fit for our customer base. Is it a good fit for our carrier network? And is it a better long-term solution as those carriers become more and more established?
You mentioned something there, and I think that's what we've seen. You mentioned kind of the capacity constraints of 2021 and 2022 that we talked about, as far as like you were able to use that against, and then like you could force packages versus restrict.
Yeah.
We're seeing that same thing as far as like piloting, right? So how do I test out a new carrier, but only for so much, only for that ideal use case,
Yep.
and hopefully find other use cases for it, in the term. But I think that testing is what we're seeing a lot in the market, as far as, let me dip a toe instead of my whole
Yep.
whole left foot. And then as we were kind of planning this webinar, we were talking, there's a bunch of different things that could have came up today we went down, but I think you talk about carrier coverage. At one point, you guys are fortunate with the East Coast, West Coast, right? So you guys have a good
Yep.
footprint. From our perspective, there are shippers that have a great footprint, or their DCs in like Doral, Miami, or their DCs in LA only, or Massachusetts, right? So the carrier mix that can obviously change, but even within the East Coast, West Coast, you've got the whole central region that Texas, for an example, right? Like, it could be 2 to 3 days from either. So which one do you fulfill from, right? I think from our perspective, that gets into more OMS and order optimization and kind of helping with that equation, maybe even before it even hits, a WMS type component. But I think that's the other thing, the way is just like the tweeners, right? Like, you could fulfill to that Dallas zip code a couple different ways, right? And maybe
Yep.
piloting is one way to find out what's best, but maybe as soon as you pilot and go with somebody, another alternative comes up, right? And so back to that flexibility. So.
Yep. Yeah, the flexibility is huge. And every business has its own unique challenges. The challenges that I have are different than what the people on the call have. So it's understanding where are my challenges, and then again, going to identify partners that will help you solve those.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, it's a pain in the butt because I get hit up 20, 30 times a day by carriers. Don't worry. It's not the most fun, but every once in a while you got to answer one of those calls. I try and answer like 2 a week.
Well, you had the joy of going to Parcel Forum and being, on the website, and your information's out there now. So
Everyone's got my cell phone number.
You'll get called about Parcel Forum in like March of next year. Be like, hey, you want to reconnect? So great.
I've never been more popular in my entire life than the month leading up to Parcel Forum.
So we've got just a few more minutes left. We've got a couple more questions, so let's see if we can try to get through these before we hit the top of the hour. Pointed question. You asked for hard ones. This isn't a hard one, but it's very pointed. Audience wants to know, what's your software stack? What's your WMS?
WMS is homegrown. So
okay.
I don't know what the platform is. I'm sorry. I'm not that into the weeds on the tech side, but it's homegrown. Our ERP is NetSuite. We don't have an OMS currently. Our WMS kind of acts as an OMS. It's one of when I was talking about improvements and one of the future states for us, OMS is kind of the next step in our journey as far as from a tech standpoint. So ProShip talks directly with our WMS, which is a homegrown system.
Okay. All right, last question. How has Backcountry improved efficiency and customer satisfaction around returns and exchanges?
Man, returns. This Returns is challenging. We've changed the rules. So we used to allow customers to return anything. So like you could buy something. We had a pair of shoes to get returned that were like, you could clearly walk 6,000 miles in these things. But we took it. We were like, here, we'll send you a new pair, or send you your money back. Now we're doing 90 days. One of the projects we were working on was, right now we give people their money back when the return is processed in the warehouse. We're going to give them their money back on carrier first scan. But then that was in 2022, but then we saw a massive spike in fraud. And so we decided not to do that. We sell a lot of high value goods. We get targeted a decent amount.
Sure.
As far as making returns easier, we really haven't done as much as we probably should have, to be honest. It's definitely an area of need and something we want to look at. I think an easy one for us is allowing people to do postal returns versus right now we give people a FedEx label. You have to, and we rely on them to go drop it off to a FedEx location, right? So we'll give you a label. You got to put it, use the box it came in or put it in a box and go drop it off at a FedEx location. Returns technology and services, really, like third-party return consolidators and different services that are available. You talked about carriers evolving. Well, the returns has also evolved. It's not something we've dipped our toe into yet, but it's definitely an identified need. So bad answer for a good question.
Well, the industry, though, it doesn't matter what trade show you go to. NRF always to start the year is like half returns vendors and half point of sale software, right? And like in-store experience, right? But it's been, returns have been, people have wrestled it for, I don't know, my entire time here. It's kind of at a fever pitch this last couple of years, but it's going to be interesting kind of what the breakthrough is there, right? It's that balance of supporting your customers, but also not exposing yourself, right? Like, it's delicate. So,
yeah. FedEx and UPS they've partnered with more people, right, to offer more drop-off locations and try and make it as friendly as possible. So that's gotten better, I think. So that's an enhancement. Again, the carrier did something, I didn't do anything. But there's definitely a quickly evolving landscape there, and I think it'll come to a head here in the next couple of years because it's a really big cost center for a lot of businesses.
Sure. Well, we're at time. I appreciate both of you for your back and forth, your candor, and your insight. Obviously, on the screen we have some links to ProShip and Backcountry, how to reach us, contact us. There's a little additional contact information. So appreciate the audience sticking through it. And Tony, Julian, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah,
All right.
Thanks.